How is it possible that a driver like Lewis Hamilton, doing everything perfect on the track, accelerating hard and following every instruction from the team, ends up being overtaken without being able to defend himself as if his car were limited? What he revealed after the Japanese GP not only revealed a simple lack of performance, it left Frédéric Vasseur completely shocked and opened a much more worrying question. Does Ferrari really understand what is happening with its own car? What happened with Lewis Hamilton in Japan is not understood if we do not look at the context with which he arrived at that race, because it was not just any weekend, it was the moment in which everything seemed to start to fall into place. He had just achieved a result that had completely changed the narrative at Ferrari, breaking a long drought and showing that adaptation to the team was paying off. There was optimism, there was a feeling of progress, and above all there was a clear idea within the team. They were beginning to understand the car. But Suzuka abruptly broke that illusion. From the first laps, Hamilton begins to notice something that doesn't fit. It is not an obvious problem, is not a mechanical failure that forces you to abandon, is something much more subtle, but also much more dangerous. The car just doesn't push like it should. There's not that extra power in a straight line. There's not that responsiveness when you step on the accelerator. Why lo más inquietante? No es algo puntual, es constante. As the race progresses, the situation becomes more and more evident. Hamilton remains in competitive positions at the beginning, but little by little he begins to lose ground, not because of mistakes, not because of excessive wear, but because the surrounding cars begin to overtake him with an ease that has no logical explanation from the cockpit. He himself makes it clear later. He was at full throttle. He was executing exactly what the team asked of him, managing energy as instructed, and still the car did not respond. This is where the problem stops being technical and becomes structural. Because when a driver like Hamilton cannot explain what is happening, it means that the failure is not obvious even to someone with his experience. And that's what really sets off alarm bells within Ferrari. There's no clear cause at that time. There's no immediate answer. There is only one certainty. The car was not delivering the power it should for much of the race. But what ends up making this episode critical is the internal comparison. Hamilton begins to notice that not all red cars are suffering the same. And there the name of Charles Leclerc appears. Because while he struggles to maintain positions without being able to defend himself, his partner seems to have a different performance, especially in terms of power. And this completely changes the dimension of the problem. It is no longer just that the car has a limitation, it is that this limitation does not affect everyone equally. Hamilton says it openly. He doesn't understand why Leclerc had more power with the same car. And that phrase, more than any technical data, is what leaves Frédéric Vasseur in an extremely delicate situation. Because it implies that Ferrari not only has a problem, but that it doesn't even have full control over how that problem manifests itself between its two drivers. The final result, that drop to 6th position, is almost the least of it. What is really important is what this race reveals. A driver who does everything right but cannot compete, a car that does not respond as it should, and a team that, at least at that moment, does not have a clear explanation for what is happening. And when in Formula One you don't understand your own car, that's when the real problems begin. After the race, all eyes are pointed directly at the Ferrari wall, and especially at Frédéric Vasseur, who is forced to give a quick response to statements that were already generating noise throughout the paddock. What Hamilton had let out was not minor. Lack of power, inconsistency, and differences with his teammate. It was too big to ignore. And then the explanation comes, but far from closing the problem, it makes it even more complex. Ferrari begins to talk about the energy management system, specifically the famous overtaking mode, a key element in the new generation of single-seaters, where the power delivery is not constant or automatic, but depends on multiple factors: distance from the car in front, energy recovery, specific activation moments. That is, you do not always have all the power available even if you are accelerating fully. Here appears a key concept that changes the entire reading of the race, the so-called negative loop. According to what is beginning to slip from the team, Hamilton would have been trapped in a kind of cycle where he could not correctly activate that extra power because he did not meet the necessary conditions on the track, and at the same time, not having that extra, he could not get close enough to the car in front to activate it. That is to say, the more I needed it, the less access I had to it. And this fits perfectly with what he described. He was flat out, he was doing everything right, but the car wouldn't deliver. The problem is that this explanation opens another even bigger crack. Because if everything depends on external conditions and how the race develops, then why wasn't Charles Leclerc trapped in that same cycle? Why did he seem to have more power available at key moments? That's where the narrative becomes dangerous for Ferrari. Because now there are two possibilities, and neither is good. Either the car is not working evenly between both drivers, or the management of the system, whether from software, strategy, or settings, is not being equally effective on both sides of the garage. And in both cases, the problem is no longer specific, it is structural. The most striking thing is that Hamilton, far from accepting this explanation as definitive, makes it clear that he still does not understand what really happened. And that is what ends up raising tension within the team, because when the driver and the team do not share the same reading of the problem, it means that they are still far from solving it. The first thing that becomes clear is that Lewis Hamilton is not calm with the team's explanation. There is no closure, no definitive conclusion, just a nagging feeling that something doesn't add up. And when a driver of his level leaves a Grand Prix saying that he needs to find out if there is something wrong with the car, that is not a simple statement, it is an internal alert. Because in Formula One, the real problems are not the ones that appear, they are the ones you don't understand. And Ferrari, at this point, doesn't quite understand it. The comparison with Charles Leclerc remains the most uncomfortable point in this entire story. Two identical cars, two elite drivers, but completely different sensations in the race. And that leaves a question floating within the team that no one can ignore. Are both sides of the garage really operating under the same conditions? This is where the figure of Frédéric Vasseur comes into full focus. Because managing a technical problem is one thing, but managing the perception of your pilots is another entirely. If Hamilton begins to doubt the car, if he begins to feel that he does not have the same tools as his teammate, the problem stops being mechanical and also becomes psychological and structural within the team. And this is key, because Ferrari had been building a narrative of growth, stability, of having left the mistakes of the past behind, but Japan breaks that line. Not because of the result, but because of what it reveals, that there are still areas of the car, or its management, that are not completely under control. And in a season where every detail makes a difference, this can be the start of something much bigger. Hamilton is not talking about a bad strategy. He is not talking about traffic or tires. He is talking about power, the most basic element of performance in Formula One. And if that fails, or worse still, if you don't know why it fails, then the entire project comes into question. The conclusion of all this is not simply that Lewis Hamilton had a bad race in Japan. It is that for the first time in this new stage with Ferrari, he has exposed a crack that cannot be ignored. Because when a driver like him talks about a lack of power, about not being able to compete at full throttle, and also acknowledges that he does not understand what is happening, the problem stops being an isolated incident and becomes an alarm signal. Not because of the result itself, but because of what it implies. Ferrari did not have full control of its own performance on the track. And that is what really touches Frédéric Vasseur. Because beyond the technical explanation, beyond the famous energy management system, what remains is an uncomfortable feeling. The team could not give one of its drivers the same tools as the other, or at least could not guarantee that they worked in the same way. And in a sport where everything is measured to the millimeter, that uncertainty is dangerous. The comparison with Charles Leclerc is the point that changes everything because it transforms a technical problem into a possible internal performance conflict. And if Ferrari cannot understand exactly what happened, that doubt will continue to grow race after race. Hamilton has done something that not all drivers do. He has put the problem on the table without glossing over it. And now the pressure is completely on the team's side. Because if Ferrari manages to explain and correct what happened, this will remain as an isolated episode at the beginning of the season. But if he doesn't, Japan won't be remembered as a simple anomaly. It will be the moment when the doubts began. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.